All right, I'm back. So much stuff is happening. Trump in office, my goodness. A lot of stuff happens when that boy is in the office compared to other presidents, I have to say. So here I am back. I did that just give you the podcast about, hey, why don't you go check on whether or not water vapor is a greenhouse gas to try and help you with my credibility. Believing in me, believing that, the stuff I'm saying here is valid, but different, and not what you're going to hear elsewhere. And some of it will be opinion. There's no denying that. But when I think I'm delivering facts, I'm going to tell you I think I'm delivering facts. Like, hey, water vapor is a greenhouse gas. And facts, not alternative facts, but facts, they're not really debatable. And that is part of the gridlock that's happened here in the U.S. is a lack of agreement on facts. For example, on climate change. What are the facts? Is it even happening? So, there's a lot of nebulous stuff out there. There's a lot of gray kind of, hey, how do I weigh these things from the point of view of the individual voter? And I think that's purposeful. Now, moneyed power, the oligarchs, power to the people, it's a problem for them, right? Because doing what's good for the 99% is usually not what's best for the 1%. It may be fine for the 1%, but they seem to have embraced a certain selfishness here in the 21st century, I have to say. The oligarchs, I mean. So, they are obscuring facts and to skew opinion. And that's why I am fearful about some talk about a constitutional convention and maybe reforming the Constitution. And that's why I did the podcast on the Bill of Rights, so you understood what the Bill of Rights were and how it really empowered you. It wasn't, the rules the slaveholders gave themselves and didn't give anyone else. You now have the rights of the slaveholders. And the slaveholders were experts at, denying others of rights. And therefore, they were expert in creating a document to defend their rights and to prevent the individual from being abused by the state, or at least to make it harder. Because, of course, the chilling effect of the state is to have a lot of power, just by the fact that they are the state. So, went through the Bill of Rights, the 10 Amendments, showed how most of them weren't really in effect to the extent that the Founding Fathers felt that they would be in effect. And that how that lack of, execution in the ground, practical execution of the Bill of Rights is skewing the representative republic we're supposed to have. And I even pointed out, hey, there was actually 12 amendments, and only 10 became the Bill of Rights. 2 of them didn't get passed, though one of them then later got passed. There was one passed saying, hey, Congress can't give itself a raise. And, that was one of the 12, and one of the 2 that didn't get approved. So, what's that 12th one? I saved that for this podcast, because that 12th one I think is pretty important in looking at today's situation where, the president why doesn't he win the popular vote? Why is the Electoral College so skewed toward one party? Is this really what the Founding Fathers thought 21st century America was going to be? No, this is not what they thought. And in fact, the House of Representatives, the size of the House of Representatives has been frozen since 1917, which I think is an interesting year for these kind of things to start happening, because some other shenanigans seemed to happen in 1917 with the income tax and the Federal Reserve. The full extent of all those, what that means for us today, I think that's is open for debate. But anyway, in 1917, they end up, freezing the size of the House of Representatives. And, that causes the representation to start to break down. The original Founding Fathers really thought that a congressman in the House of Representatives would represent 1 in 30,000. And then they actually wrote into the document that it would be, they wrote into this 12th Amendment exactly how it should expand over the years. And so 1 to 30,000 until you get to 100, and then 1 to 40,000 until you get to 200 or 250, and then 1 to 50,000, and this is supposed to be adjusted every census. Every census is supposed to drive this. So, but they start not doing it in Congress like they're supposed to do. They're not doing their constitutional duty. They freeze the size of the House of Representatives. And currently, a House of Representatives seat is, representing 700,000. 700,000. So that is enormously, skewed compared to the idea that the Founding Fathers thought that the representation should be 1 to 40,000, 1 to 50,000, depending on how many representatives there were. Now, of course, the current population, we're looking at possibly, having 1,200 or even 2,000 congressmen. But we do have a populous country, and if you're going to have a representative republic, you need to have this kind of representation. And that's how things get skewed. Because when you look at Wyoming, for example, that is a state with just a few 100,000 people. So they have 2 senators, and they, their senators are better representative of the people of Wyoming than a congressman is in California, for example. In California, it's practically 1 to 1,000,000. And that is hard to get your message through to the House of Representatives. But in Wyoming, it's 1 to a few 100,000 for the representative. And then if you look at the actual Senate representation, here you're looking at 1 to just a couple 100,000 people in the Senate, where it's so weighted, where this state has 2 votes, the more senior body. So, living in a less populous state means that you have a lot of power in the Senate to get your message through. And as long as the population is relatively even throughout the country, that's not a problem. But as it starts to, coalesce in different portions and within states, it does become a problem. And so the House of Representatives is supposed to be the balance to that. And the House of Representatives have been frozen. Why has it been frozen? It should be expanding every census, or every few census. That's what it did until the 20th century. Right after we put Arizona in 1912, we get to 435. And because there's some rules about how a state has Senate representation of 2, and it must have at least 1 seat in the House of Representatives. So even if a state only had 100 people in it, they'd still have 1 seat in the House of Representatives. So that's how you get this skewing, where you have enormous power from these low population states, where they have the Senate representation, but even their congressmen, they get better representation for their congressmen as far as a ratio of the voting populace to the representative. And this really, really has to change. These are the key things. The structure of democracy broken, 100 years ago, when the Congress decides, hey, we're not going to increase the size of the House of Representatives anymore. Of course, in this broken bipartisan, or lack of bipartisan, cooperation of any kind, the hyper-partisanship means that neither side wants to allow this expansion that it's supposed to be for us, the people. We have to force this stuff through. We cannot ignore the basic architecture of our democracy. And there's going to be a big push, I think, under Trump for a constitutional convention. And what we need is a simple administration of the Constitution as it exists. And maybe get this 12th Amendment of the Bill of Rights that was originally rejected, put in there, saying the representation has got to be more like, what the Founding Fathers originally described. I mean, James Madison goes into this in his Federalist Paper 55, and he talks about this ratio of the voter to the representatives. So this is important. This is an amendment to the Constitution that maybe should be there, just like the 11th one of the first 12, a Bill of Rights. The 2 of them that didn't get passed. One of them, Congress can't give itself a raise, eventually gets passed in the 1990s. So I have to say the Founding Fathers are probably quite correct that that 12th Amendment probably belongs in there too. And we need to think about having a more representative government as the architecture of this representative republic was originally laid out. And that means we're going to have 1,000 representatives or 2,000 representatives even. But when you look at the staffs of each of these congressmen, we already got that kind of populace being housed all over Washington, D.C. It's just, it's representation by a different name and less representative. It's easier to game that system. When there's thousands of representatives, it's a lot harder to buy the House of Representatives. It becomes the voice of the people, the vox populi. That's where it is, because it's hard to control it, because there are literally thousands of voices there. And they represent 70,000 or 100,000 people instead of almost 1 million as it is in California. I mean, Californians are totally being muted and just being completely disenfranchised. So Californians, among all of the citizens of the United States, probably really need this particular amendment to get pushed through. So one time, I mentioned James Madison there in his Federalist Papers. He also, along with Hamilton, after the Electoral College was put into place, the country begins to grow and political parties are created. And Madison and Hamilton, who are the youngest of the founding fathers, they come into the 19th century, the early 1800s, and they see the Electoral College. Now, each of these electors was supposed to be matching a congressional district and not a winner-take-all by state. And when the states started to do that, mostly driven by partisan party politics, which meant that if a state could go to one party, it was a huge benefit to them. So that's why states get control of the State House. They would make these changes to how electors went to the Electoral College. And now 48 of the 50 states have a winner-take-all system. But that wasn't how it was supposed to be in the beginning. So yeah, Electoral College was not supposed to be this way. Madison, Hamilton, the younger of the founding fathers, they hear about this. They see that it's happening in the early 19th century, this winner-take-all system with the states, and they start to speak out against it vehemently, proposing amendments and trying to get this to not be done, because they realize that it does break, representation in a way that is not good for the people. So the Electoral College was meant to mirror the congressional districts, and that representation, is more granular than this winner-take-all system that allows political parties to carry an entire state. So potentially you control the State House, you can control how these electors get sent to the Electoral College. So with the Electoral College being gamed by the political parties in this way, it breaks it. And it's easier to game it. And then when you have this lack of granularity because you have frozen the size of the House of Representatives, and so the Electoral College is tied to the number of representatives, so you have 435 in the House and 100 in the Senate, plus the 3 for D.C., I think, that gives you the 538 that's in the Electoral College. So if there was, 1,800 congressmen in the House of Representatives, well, of course, there would be, over 2,000 electors, and there'd be, much greater granularity and representation of the people. So unless you're going to go for my idea with the popular vote electing the president, and that requiring an auditable system, a people auditable system with GoFundMe.com/Save the Republic, you want to do it that way, I'm all for it. I got a plan for that. It's up there if you want to contribute some money, make it move forward. The other thing is, hey, maybe getting the Electoral College back to the way it's supposed to be as the original vision of the Founding Fathers. And these are the kind of things that you're not hearing out in the mainstream. I'm pretty convinced of that. I listen to the pundits on TV. That's partially where I come up with my opinions, is listening to what's being said out there. You got to stay informed to have an opinion. That's part of being an engaged citizen. All you should be doing it as much as I'm doing it, to be really honest. In any case, the ideas here, that was why I pushed the, I went out and talked about water vapor and whether it's a greenhouse gas or not, because I understand that there's no reason for people to listen to me or reason to believe that what I'm saying is valid, because it is so different than what you're hearing in the mainstream. I understand that. What I'm saying is different than what's in the mainstream, and there's facts here that you don't hear elsewhere. So that's why I felt compelled to talk about water vapor being a greenhouse gas. So you could go Google that and see, hey, I don't hear that anywhere, but that fact it's verifiable. And this guy is a guy who's giving me those kind of facts. In the same way I'm giving you these kind of facts, there was actually 12 amendments to the original Bill of Rights. There were supposed to be 12, and we did 10. And then we put in the 11th in the 90s. And the 12th one maybe matters now in the 21st century, that we've had a couple of elections where the popular vote doesn't mirror the Electoral College. And clearly, when you see an election like 2016, where we're talking about literally tens of thousands of votes, swinging Wisconsin, swinging Michigan, these are small numbers when you're talking about millions upon millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of votes, in this country being cast. A few thousand in this precinct and that precinct, it smacks to manipulation and the computer analysis of where I gotta tweak some numbers. I mean, I wrote code that did safe harbor retirement programs, and basically the owners could save more money if they contributed more to the people in the company. And there was a formula there and a balance there. And so they wanted to save $1 million this year. So much money had to go into the employee plan and had to be spread out over how they were doing their matching, da-da-da-da-da. There was weighting that needed to happen to consider this to be a true retirement plan that benefited not just the owners but also employees. So I wrote code that does that kind of stuff, where search through everything and seed in numbers and say, oh, okay, I need to put in a couple of dollars here, boom, 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 now they can save their $1 million. So in the most efficient way. So that is old code. That is an old algorithm, I'm pretty sure. And it's just being refined and refined and refined. And we as the people, unless we're going to have an auditable system, we at least have to have the granularity that the Founding Fathers originally saw as the representation of the Republic versus the people. Representative Republic, yes, you have representatives that go to Washington, D.C. and speak your voice, but their constituents can't be 1,000,000 to 1, because that's just too many constituents to even be able to represent effectively. And it makes representation in Washington so small that money can game it much easier, right? If there's a couple thousand in there, I got to buy 1,001 congressmen to get my stuff through. Right now, I only got to buy, 223 congressmen to get my stuff through. So, you see what I'm saying. So as long as Citizens United is in place and money and corporations are people and money is speech, then we got to make it as hard as possible for money to game the system. And the granularity of representation in the House of Representatives and in the Electoral College, it matters. I know it's boring. Buy the book, Libertarian Socialism. You can get some more facts and stuff in there. I'm not going to bore you anymore with the facts and the statistics and the numbers of, how this thing's supposed to work. But I'm telling you, it has been frozen, and therefore that freezing has allowed money power to game this system much easier, and to disenfranchise voters. Whole states of voters like California, boom, no representation at all. I expect California to really be a state that starts pushing for some reform here in the House of Representatives and in the Electoral College, because that whole state, which is a huge economic engine for this country, is not properly represented in D.C. And they know it. And any illusions they had about it, they lost them in 2016 when California went 4-1 for 3-1 for Hillary. So there was quite a bit of dismay in California over who is sitting in the White House. That's not to say this shouldn't be in the White House. The system isn't what the system is. The system is what the system is, and he is as legitimate as Obama. because he was elected by the same system. It's up to us, the people, right? You and me, we have to change the system if we want representation. And the Founding Fathers gave us the tools, we just got to use them. Do we have the courage to use the tools to execute the Bill of Rights? The tolerance to stop, making laws against each other and believing the guy next door is somehow going to get more money out of welfare or whatever we think about each other. We seem to believe the worst about each other. And we have to understand that we, the 99%, have a ton in common. And we can get an agenda passed that helps the 99%. But we need representation, and we need agreement on the agenda. Libertarian socialism, that's what it's about. And the facts that you're going to hear here are not widely known because they're purposely being obfuscated. Purposely. Money and power does not want this knowledge to be spread because it's a threat. Knowledge is a threat. It always is. So use your heads. Think about what I'm saying here. And think about the facts that I'm giving you. Were there really 12 amendments that made up the original Bill of Rights and only 10 got passed? Did one of those get passed in the 90s? What did that 12th one say? Did it really represent and say that the representation of ratio of people to congressmen was 1 to 40,000 or 1 to 50,000? Go look the stuff up. You're not going to hear it anywhere else. And if you don't believe me, you should go look it up. And even if you do believe me, you probably should go look it up. Because you're going to be appalled that these facts are not widely known. Because these people who call themselves the pundits, they're apparently just the mouthpieces. They aren't going to say anything that threatens their paychecks, are they? They're not going to say anything that threatens their paychecks. That's truth. So, be engaged. And let's try and execute a system that was given to us and is now being dismantled before our eyes. Will we allow it to continue to be dismantled, or will we say, no, stop, and put back those pieces you took out? Maybe we want to add this other one about how many people are represented by a man or woman in D.C. Libertarian socialism out.